Any hints on the next champion buff? Can we get a class type at least? Next week, I start work on 2 reworks. Both of them are cosmics. That's one of the questions that I asked Kabam Ein, one of the character developers, and that is the response that we got. So, interesting. Rework on 2 cosmic champions. We don't know which cosmics are getting buffed. That's all the information we have here, but that is pretty interesting. And if I had to guess what one of the cosmics is going to be, if we look at the 6-star crystal and look at the history with the science champion, how Luke Cage and Red Hulk are both available in the initial batch of 6-star champions, well, maybe we can look to the initial batch of 6-star cosmic champions, and I'm thinking maybe Gam Gam? We're going to have to wait and see on that one, but in the meantime, we did get to ask a bunch more questions to Kabam Ein, specifically about character development, because that is what his role at Kabam is. We couldn't ask anything about, when is Act 6 coming, or what's the next game mode that you guys are working on, nothing like that. These are questions specifically geared towards character development, with a couple of, goofy questions thrown in the mix. I couldn't help myself, guys. I'm sorry. You'll see what I'm talking about as we go here. And not all of these questions come from me. This is a mixture of questions from the other content creators as well. There's a few questions from myself in here, but it's a mixture of all the content creators that we're getting to ask these questions. Question 1. What is the process by which new game features and champions are selected? For champions, we plan pretty much a whole year out well in advance, with the understanding that a solid 20 to 30% of them will change. We select them based on upcoming Marvel events to tie into movies, TV shows, big events in the comics, etc., along with what makes sense for the story we're creating, as well as balancing the count of each different class and picking champs that we think are cool or whose powers lend themselves well to the contest. For a feature, things are a little less cut and dry, but usually a new feature starts with a goal, and then we build backwards from there. For example, Dungeons came out of the goal of offering a way to play with friends who might not be in your alliance, and at a scale much smaller than AVA. So AVA being Alliance versus Alliance, basically Alliance Wars. And this all makes sense. You go and see a new Marvel movie, you see Thor Ragnarok, you see Gladiator Hulk in there, and of course you want to play with Gladiator Hulk, so why not add him to the game? And even if there was no kind of connection to cross-promote the two, it'd still be just more fun to do it this way versus just picking random characters. And the feature thing makes sense too. I think a lot of players want a way of playing with friends outside of alliances, and yeah, dungeons seem to work out pretty good in that regard. Any chance we can start to expect champion refreshes on the same or similar schedule as brand new champions? I.e., once a month an older champion gets a refresh/balance, Spider-Gwen, Joe Fixit, Superior Iron Man, Magneto, Gambit, Deadpool, X-Force, etc., or has the focus shifted a bit to new champion synergies to revitalize champions, or is it a mix of both? It'll be a bit of both. New unique synergies for champions who are in need of a rework have always been meant as a bit of a stopgap. They allow us to give a bit of a lift of an existing champion without having to invest in a full rework. However, we are all aware that some champions just need a rework, not just a synergy. And we have a list of champions we want to update as well. We want to try to get on a regular cadence, but to be completely honest, they tend to be an easy thing to cut from a build without impacting something else. So they've been the victim of that many times now. But we're giving them a much higher priority than we used to, and we've got a couple of them underway right now. Still a ways to go, but we're heading in the right direction. So I like this answer a lot. I mean, I'd prefer if they just said, yes, we're going to have champions on X, Y, and Z date, but of course they can't tell us that. What they are doing, however, is being honest and upfront with us and saying, yeah, they have other things that need to get pushed out on a regular time period. And reworking the champions, although it's something that they want to do, and something that they're trying to do, at the end of the day, they sometimes get cut from whatever current build is being pushed out. So that is cool to see that they are trying to step up that side of things, and that combined with the other question that I previously read about the cosmic champions that are getting reworked, that's pretty interesting. So we'll see how that goes going forward. Does Ian stand for fabulous mustache? Mustache questions don't always have to make sense. Who would ask something like this? Oh yeah. I'm afraid not. I stole the name shamelessly from Cowboy Bebop. How is a champion's usefulness gauged in the contest when creating/rebalancing them? I.e., Labyrinth Contender, Quester, Burst Damage, Defense, etc. TLDR, all of the above. We also look at things like how their strengths compare to current top AVA champions, both attackers and defenders, how they match up against tough buffs nodes, how vulnerable their kit is to being shut down by certain buffs and abilities, how well they shut down current strong defenders, what's their skill cap, a fancy way to say how hard is it to play them really well, do they synergize well, both in terms of literal synergies and just complementary abilities, with other powerful champions. I imagine this has to be one of the most fun parts of creating a character, and probably very challenging too, especially now that there's, like 125 characters in the game, something like that, and it's growing every 2 weeks. Another champion gets added, so another year from now, and we're going to have another 26 champions thrown in the game. Pretty nuts when you think about all the different things that make up a character and how you try to balance them, and it's got to be an interesting part of the job, I imagine. Who was the first champion you designed? Phoenix. So Phoenix came out, I believe, in October of 2016, and it kind of makes sense why Kabam Ein was not at Comic-Con in 2016. Now that I think about it, or at least I didn't see him there. If he was maybe finishing up the final touches of Phoenix, or maybe Phoenix was already done long before that. I don't know. But that is interesting to note. So he has not been a champion designer from the beginning of this game. He was not designing the initial batch of champions. He came along somewhere after that. But I mean, he's certainly been designing champions for a couple of years now, basically. So that's good to know. And I'm kind of curious if Kabam Ein maybe did something else with Kabam before that. The current meta seems to be dominated by a small number of champions. Any plans to change this? We're always trying, haven't quite managed it yet, but don't worry, we're not giving up. There are tons of contributing factors to the way the current meta has shaken out, but one of the biggest things to address is the lack of information provided while placing defenders in AVA. What I mean by that is, if we don't give you any information on what the other alliance is doing when you place your defenders, you will place for efficiency, which leads to often placing the same defenders on the same nodes. But if you're placing the same defenders, then your opponent probably wants to bring the same attackers. If you have more info on who the attackers were bringing, then you might try and counter with your own defender placement. But at a high level, alliances would have more need to bring a balanced group of attackers. But we have some structural issues with the way AVA matchmaking works right now, which we'll need to work out first. We're also looking at more updates to the AVA nodes themselves to offer better counters to some of the new abilities champions are getting these days that none of the existing buffs really counter properly. We want to look at more ways for you to customize your AVA defense. We want to rework some more meh tier champions to counter some existing opponent attackers and defenders. We want to look at masteries. How awesome would it be if you could save out multiple mastery setups and choose which one you want as you lock in your team. One for defense, one with deep wounds, another with suicides, etc. Suffice to say, there's lots for us to keep working on, but our goal is as many different viable champions as possible. Wow, there's a lot of information in this question. I feel like I could have an hour-long discussion. Maybe it's some kind of podcast, perhaps, discussing this with some other endgame players, because there's a lot going on in here. All right, where to begin? So actually, I'll start with the mastery thing, because a lot of people have been asking for a way to save multiple mastery setups for a long time now, and this is something I've always had mixed feelings about. I feel like it needs to be done the right way. There's games that I feel do it right, and games that don't, and it's not so obvious all the time of which is like the best way to do it. For example, Diablo 3, a game that I've always been kind of critical on in the past, that I feel like they got it wrong, actually. They made it as easy as possible to switch out your character's abilities, and I actually think that that hurt the game in a way, versus other games that I've played where, yes, you can change your abilities and things like masteries or skills or whatever you want to call them, talents. You could change all those things, but it has to come at some kind of a price. Not necessarily unit-wise. It could be a different type of price, but there has to be some kind of a price in order to keep things a bit more interesting. So I'm curious to see if Kabam does do some kind of multiple mastery setup, and I'm curious to see in what way they go about it. I would certainly love to have an easy way to switch back to suicides for arena grinding, but again, I want to see it done right. All right, let's get back to Ian's answer about why the meta has kind of shaped up to be the way it is right now. I think one of the reasons why we all use the same defenders and attackers is just that we have limited rank up resources. I just got my 10th rank 4 or higher champion, but some of them have to be used for things like Alliance Quest. Some of them are just not good defenders at all, so I can't use them. And of course, my attackers, I want to take my strongest champions possible to reduce the risk of death to, as low as possible, basically. So I'm taking in my rank 5 champions to attack, and I have, a team of defenders that is not even the best team of defenders, but it's the best that I can work with. So I don't think it's really possible for us to actually throw in and try to change up our defense on the fly. It kind of has to stay the same. It doesn't stay the same as far as the nodes are concerned. Those nodes get shaken up every time, just because players do keep track of the nodes and the defenders at the highest levels. At least we keep track of all that stuff. Every time an alliance squares off against another alliance, you can bet that both alliances are keeping track of that stuff for future matches. So yeah, it's a little bit curious. I want to know kind of more about what their plans are here, where they're saying maybe if we have more information about what the other alliance is doing. That's very curious to hear. I do think a lot of alliances hurt themselves, though, by not bringing a diverse lineup to attack. I think that's something that's very underrated, actually. A lot of people, they'll rank up 10 Blades in their battle group, and that is not correct. As powerful as Blade is, you don't want 10 rank 5 Blades running around, because some paths are going to be better. There's going to be better champions that fit that path, or for certain nodes. Corvus is coming up a lot. Everybody wants to get their hands on Corvus. It is a mistake for all 10 players to have Corvus at rank 5 in your battle group. Yeah, I mean, these champions are more powerful than the others, and of course you want to have at least a few of them in your battle group, and maybe even quite a bit of them, but definitely not all 10 people having the same champions. I think that's hurt alliances in the past when it comes to the whole Trinity thing, the Holy Trinity. So that is also something else that's pretty interesting to consider. All right, we've got to move on to the next question because, like I said, I can talk about that one for a long time. So we'll talk more about that during live streams. All right, next up. Some competitive games have frequent balance updates that tweak character stats and abilities. MCOC doesn't seem to follow this formula. Can you share the philosophy on how champion balance is approached in MCOC? So this is one of the questions that I asked, and I was thinking about all of the other competitive games I've played in the past where, like Dota 2, for example, there's very, very frequent balance updates, and they're minor balance updates, just little tweaks here and there to certain characters' damage or survivability, or in that game, because you're moving around in a big field, sometimes their movement speed will just be tweaked just a little bit, or just very, very minor things like that, along with some major changes if a certain character needs it. And so yeah, here's what Ian had to say in regards to balance in Marvel Contest of Champions. MCOC has some interesting challenges around balancing champs, and a lot of it ties back to how much effort it takes to rank up champions to make them viable. This means we have to be very careful that we don't shift things too quickly, because players will only be able to make changes to the roster so fast. We also know that it can really suck to work so hard to rank a champion up, only to have them nerfed just after you do. So we try to avoid straight up nerfing champions if at all possible, much preferring to introduce new counters to a powerful champ, either in the form of new buff nodes, new champions, or I think this is one of the biggest wins for champion reworks. Reworking an existing champ that many players have but haven't had use for is one of the fastest ways to spread a counter through the contest quickly. We don't want champs not to be good, we just don't want one champion to be the answer to everything. We're also working on how better to communicate changes to the community in a way that allows for us to tune and balance the game without you all feeling like we're jerking you around and changing the ground rules on you. This is another question that actually has quite a bit going on in the answer, and this is a question that I asked kind of knowing the answer beforehand. I know that there's a big difference between the way that this game works and how long it takes you to get champions and how long it takes you to get rank up materials versus a game like Dota where you do just start out the game with every single character unlocked. And if changes happen to one, well, you just pick up a different one if you don't like them anymore. And that game is also much more competitive with millions and millions of dollars on the line in tournaments. So yeah, this game is very different, and I absolutely understand why balance updates can't happen as frequently. But I asked this question because I was hoping that Kabam Ein would elaborate more beyond what I can kind of figure out on my own, and he delivers. He delivers big time here. There's a lot of things going on. One thing in particular that I found interesting is going back to the reworks. He says that reworking an existing champ that many players have but haven't had use for is one of the fastest ways to spread a counter through the contest quickly. So we know that Cosmic Champions are the next two reworks, or at least that's the plan for now. I guess all of this could change, right? That's kind of one of the downsides about having this kind of communication. This communication is awesome, but it comes with that asterisk of things are subject to change, right? But if Cosmic Champions are planned to be changed next, I wonder if that has anything to do with the Mystic Dispersion changes that are upcoming that I believe are still going through, but I don't think we've heard any further updates on that as of yet. So I'm curious if it has anything to do with that. If Cosmics are going to be, if they wanted to wait on that change before buffing up some Cosmics, and then we're seeing a higher representation of Cosmic Champions. But then again, we actually, with the addition of Corvus and Medusa and some of these other newer Cosmic Champions, Cosmic is already a pretty powerful class. So, I'm kind of curious what exactly their intentions are with those reworks. It'll be interesting to see which champions get reworked and exactly why. I have a feeling they are going to be like whatever the next two champions, whatever they are that do get reworked. I have a feeling they are going to be giving us either a difficult defender that we may not have a lot of counters available for, or it's going to be a counter for something that's very difficult for us to fight against. So we'll have to see how that goes. I also really like how he refers to it as an interesting challenge when it comes to balancing champions. Because in a game like this, that's exactly what it is, right? It's very difficult to work on the balance in this game. And especially, I've realized that in games that are free to play and people do spend money to get certain champions, you have to get it right the first time. There's a lot more pressure to get it right the first time. Because changing the way a champion exists after someone has paid for chances to get that champion, that pisses a lot of people off. So it is a very interesting challenge on how you can go about doing that, but I don't think it's impossible. I don't think there's anything when it comes to games that is impossible. There's always some kind of solution out there that you could find, or multiple solutions kind of working together. So yeah, it's just interesting to see how it's going to shape up going forward. The last line is also pretty interesting, where it says, "We're also working on how better to communicate changes to the community in ways that allows for us to tune and balance the game without y'all feeling like we're jerking you around and changing the ground rules on you." And I think this mostly has to do with some of the more recent updates, like Archangel, or I think Drax had an interaction change with Mordo, and some of these things were bugs, but maybe not communicated so well with us. But if they're talking about anything beyond that, it's so tough. I don't know exactly what their plans are for better communication, but that's also a very interesting challenge. Favorite champion design of 2018 so far? If I could bend the rules on my answer, I would say Taskmaster. He's not technically 2018, but December 2017 is pretty close, right? I really like the exploit weakness mechanic and how it combines with the invulnerability on his heavy. I feel like when I'm playing Taskmaster, there's a very different flow to the character from the standard parry/intercept 4 to 5 hit combo, maybe chain a special, and repeat. I also feel like he's a character which you can just play like anyone else, but with a little practice, you really start to see how the way to maximize his potential requires that unique playstyle. My following the rules to the letter answer is Cap Infinity War. I feel like he can do lots for the rest of his team with his synergies. I think it feels a bit like pick your own utility and thematically very cap. I like that his offense relies on solid defensive moves, parry for resonate charges, so the cap plus block connection is still there. Finally, I like that there is just a bit of mechanical execution around starting his heavy and canceling out into a special before the fury runs out. This is another really good answer. Kabam Ein could have just picked out a champion or two champions and told us one little detail about them and moved on to the next question. But instead, he tells us a lot about these characters and actually reveals more about the developer than the characters themselves. Tells us that he's trying to create a unique experience for players. He's not interested in just, throwing a different costume on an existing character, giving them plus 5% attack and health, and releasing that character. He's not doing that. He's giving us a different way to look at the game, a different way to play the game, and he says it here. You can play Taskmaster just like any other champion, or with a bit of practice, you can learn how to maximize his potential. So it's these mechanical changes that it seems like he's trying to work into the game too. So very interesting. Whether you like these champions or not, of course, that is going to be very, very subjective. But it is interesting to hear the reasoning why he prefers to, or his preference of character design, I guess. And I think anyone who designs characters to have this level of depth in mechanical changes to the way that you play the character, I got a feeling that Kabam Ein is probably pretty good at the game. If he wants to create these more challenging experiences, I'm curious to see how he would play Taskmaster, and if he would choose to use them just for fun, or if he would actually bring them to something like Alliance War. Very curious about something like that. I'm sure I'll probably never get the answer to that, but maybe at Comic-Con I'll have to write that one down and kind of bother him about. We'll see. Next question. Does the game data have a big impact on your design decisions? For example, players being unable to defeat healing champions, leading to more heal block abilities. Definitely, though it's usually not as clear-cut as that. Some champions and mechanics which mid-level players really struggle against, high-level players blow right through. Some champions are brutal to deal with, but only when combined with one or two specific buffs, otherwise they're no big deal. Some champions really require an RPG counter, bringing the right champion to counter them, whereas others really require you to be able to execute a specific skill to beat. Then, of course, different modes require different strengths. Some champions are only okay, but are pretty idiot-proof to play. Some champions look hilariously busted when you just see the top 0.1% of players showing what their absolute maximum potential looks like, but the rest of us mere mortals will never do that consistently ourselves. It's also easy for data to trick you. For example, a champion with a new defensive mechanic will usually spike right to the top of the best defenders list, making it easy to think, oh no, what have we done? But then they begin to fall off pretty aggressively as the community picks up on their various counters. So we try not to overreact until we're pretty sure the data has stabilized. Basically, this is just a really long-winded way to say yes. I don't have a lot to say about this one other than, it all makes sense here, especially the part about defenders being amazing when they first come out, like Infinity Man, who's still a really powerful defender, right? Iron Man Infinity War is still one of the best defenders in the game. But right when he initially came out, players couldn't get past the guy at all, right? Whereas now, players know how to counter him, and if you got the skills and the right champion, you could take him down without too much trouble. Can you give us a brief overview of the champion creation process from start to finish? This is a big answer, so I'm going to try to read through it a little bit quickly here. Okay, I'll try to keep this brief. Last time someone asked me this question, I gave them a 20-minute answer. We start with a champion roadmap for the whole year, which we try to set up pretty early. We've got something like 3/4 of next year's champions pretty much locked in at this point. When a champion is next on the to-do list, they get assigned out a champion designer, a character modeler, an FX artist, and an animator. The champion designer will do a high-level overview of what they think the champ will be in-game, things like key powers or abilities they feel are must-haves to do this character properly, then what the design goals for this character will be, i.e. attacker or defender, both. What game modes will they be good in? What mechanics will they have? What mechanics will they counter? Why should they have or / counter these mechanics? What synergies will they have? Then a champion designer for that character presents their design to the team. Feedback and iteration occurs until we have something we're happy with. Meanwhile, a concept artist will do up a 2D concept of what the character will look like, and then a modeler will get to work building it. Then everyone, designer, modeler, animator, FX artist, production, all pile into a room together to figure out at a high level what the animation should be. What their special attacks are going to be is usually the lion's share of this, but some characters have specific requirements in the basic attacks as well. The animators then start work on that, and there'll be several check-ins with everyone at various stages of completion, the real model becoming available, FX and sound going in, etc. The designer starts building a gameplay prototype, building the character's abilities using a proxy model. As soon as the character is playable, we start playtesting. The first few rounds of iteration are usually just the designer playing their own character to smooth out any obvious rough edges, get them very roughly balanced, just in the ballpark, usually based heavily on just goal posting against similar abilities and raw DPS tuning, and then we bring in as many people as possible to playtest. We do a combination of targeted, this champ is supposed to be really good / bad against this champ / mechanic / buff, as well as general testing against existing or upcoming content, one-shots, AVA Attack, AVA Defender, AVE, which I believe is Alliance Quest, Alliance versus Environment, Realm, Labyrinth, etc. This keeps going with the designer refining the champion a little more each time, improving the tuning and tweaking mechanics until they feel they're satisfied the design goals laid out in their initial pitch. Around the time of the first playtest, QA gets their hands on the character and starts testing. They do testing purely looking for bugs, as well as testing to provide more qualitative feedback and balancing feedback. As we get closer and closer to having to lock the build down for submission, when you send your build to Apple or Google to get approved, we will stop tuning and tweaking and just fix bugs until we've fixed all the bugs we can find. Then there's a bunch of boxes to check, make sure strings get submitted for localization, working with marketing on champion spotlights, the nuts and bolts of getting a character all finished. The last step is to monitor how well the champion does after they're released. Are they doing well in the areas they're supposed to? If not, why do we think that is? Is there anything that requires an immediate hotfix? Are there any unanticipated interaction with buffs, nodes, or champions, etc.? Then everyone takes a deep breath, and we start it all over on a new champion. There's usually some overlap between characters, so I'll often be bug fixing one character while working on the design of the next. There's even more detail to go into, but I just wrote a whole page in this, so I'm going to call it here. So, wow, yeah, there's a lot to it. It's cool to get that kind of inside look about how a character gets made. That's really all I have to say about that. Is I really enjoy hearing a little bit more details about how it works. Does your dancing ability derive from the power of the stash? No, the dancing preceded the stash. Perhaps that means the stash is powered by the dancing. I may or may not have played a game of Dance Dance Revolution with Kabam Ein at Comic-Con 2017. You going to New York City Comic-Con? I've got a few more questions. That's the plan, but there's a chance that our schedule won't let me slip away for that particular week, so I don't want to 100% promise anything. But so far, things are looking good, and I definitely want to go. And I hope he does go, because I do have a lot more questions to ask, as I'm sure everyone has a lot of questions that they would like to ask. So, yeah, if you guys go to Comic-Con, I mean, that's the best place to really ask questions about this game. Developers, they can't always tell you everything. There's a lot of reasons behind why they can't share every little detail, and things change, of course, but it's just a lot of fun being able to ask them questions like this. So, yeah, I hope we get to do this again. Again, I do believe that this is part 1 of the questions that are being answered. There are some other questions that got asked, and I believe those are getting answered. It's just, of course, it takes a long time for Ian to sit down and actually do this while working on all the other stuff that he was talking about, while making sure that he can keep up with designing new characters and reworking old characters and all that stuff. So I really appreciate that Kabam was willing to do this, and I think this is a good step in the right direction of increasing communication with the player base. This is perfect. So yeah, really happy that Kabam did this. That is going to do it for this video. If there are more questions that get answered, I will make another video on it, and we can certainly discuss all of these things during the live streams. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.